Welcome back to the deep dive. I want to start today by asking you to do a quick mental inventory. Think about the last time you felt truly stuck on a problem. Maybe it was a negotiation at work, a relationship hitting the same wall, or, even just a bad habit you can't seem to shake. When you looked at that problem, what tool did you reach for?
And the follow-up question is, was it the right tool?
Yeah,
Because we've all heard that saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
exactly. And that is a dangerous place to be if the problem you're facing is like a leaking pipe or a delicate piece of electronics. You cannot hammer a spreadsheet into submission.
You certainly can't, though I have seen people try. And that limits your effectiveness. It limits your options. And that's really the core premise of the book we're exploring today. The Great Mental Models, General Thinking Concepts, Volume 1 by Shane Parrish and his team at Farnham Street.
Parrish makes this really compelling argument that the quality of our outcomes in business or personal lives, everything, is basically determined by the quality of the models we have in our heads. Essentially, we need to build a better hardware store in our brains so we're not just swinging that one hammer at everything.
Precisely. We need versatility.
hmm
And what makes this particular volume so fascinating to me is where these tools come from. We're not looking at the latest business buzzwords or, pop psychology trends. We are borrowing 9 fundamental models directly from the hard sciences, physics and chemistry.
Which I'll admit might sound a little dry, maybe intimidating if you haven't opened a textbook since high school. But the mission here is really cool. It's about taking these immutable laws of the universe, gravity, energy, mass, and mapping them onto our soft skills.
Right. Because the logic is that the same forces that govern how planets orbit or how atoms bond also, in a way, govern how organizations function and how people interact. If you understand the physics of the system, you can navigate that system much more effectively.
So let's crack open the toolbox. We have a lot of ground to cover, and I want to start with a concept that most of us think is just a social nicety, but is actually a fundamental law of motion: reciprocity.
Reciprocity is a heavy hitter. In the social world, we usually define this as a win-win situation. I help you, you help me. We tend to think of it as etiquette.
Just being polite.
But if you look at the source material, this isn't just about being polite. It's Sir Isaac Newton.
Newton's third law of motion.
For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. That is the bedrock of physics. Forces always come in pairs. When you sit in a chair, your body exerts a downward force. But the chair has to exert an equal upward force. If it didn't, you'd fall right through it.
The book uses some really vivid biological examples of this, too. They talk about how octopi and squid move through the water. They aren't swimming in the way we think of it. They're using jet propulsion.
It's pure action-reaction. The squid forces water out backward. That's the action. And the equal and opposite reaction propels the squid forward. No magic, just physics. Or think about American football. When 2 players collide, the force isn't just absorbed by the one getting tackled. The tackler feels the exact same amount of force. It's a mutual interaction.
So if we map that physics model onto human behavior, we get the famous waiter study that's mentioned in the text. This is such a classic example of social physics in action.
It is. The study showed that when waiters brought the check, if they included a small gift like a single mint tips, went up by about 3%. But if they gave 2 mints, the tips didn't just double, they jumped significantly, something like 14%. The waiter initiated a positive action, and the customer felt this subconscious, almost physical compulsion to provide an equal and opposite reaction.
It really reframes the golden rule, doesn't it? It's not just treat others how you want to be treated. It's more like how you treat others determines how they're going to treat you. You're putting force into the system, and the system has to respond.
And it creates a cycle. If you help a colleague when they're just drowning in work, you aren't just being a nice person, you are storing potential energy. Later, when you're the one under pressure, the system seeks equilibrium. They are so much more likely to reciprocate. You've built a structure of support.
However, we do have to look at the warning label on this tool. The source brings up the psychologist Robert Cialdini here and notes that in human systems, unlike in physics, reciprocity isn't always perfectly equal.
And this is the critical insight, especially for anyone in a negotiation. In physics, the reaction is always equal. In society, power dynamics can distort that reaction. Reciprocity can be weaponized. If a salesperson buys you a coffee, a very small gift, they might be trying to trigger a reaction where you buy an expensive product.
Right, or agree to a meeting you'd rather skip. The gift is small, but the expected return is huge. It's an unequal exchange.
Exactly. And that doesn't happen in Newtonian physics, but it happens in office politics all the time. So the takeaway is to be aware of when someone is trying to use the law of reciprocity to coerce you into an exchange that isn't actually fair.
That's a key distinction. Okay, let's shift from laws of motion to laws of energy. Let's talk about thermodynamics. This feels like the most, I don't know, existential of the models we're covering.
It is the rules of the game for the whole universe. Thermodynamics deals with energy, how it transfers. The book touches on all four laws. But for our purposes, the first and second are the ones that really impact our daily lives.
The first law is conservation. Energy can't be created or destroyed, only transferred. You can't get something for nothing. But the second law, that's the one that explains why my garage is always a mess and why I can never find my keys.
The second law is the law of entropy. It states that in an isolated system, entropy, which is just a measure of disorder, always increases. Things naturally move from order to disorder, from structure to dust.
So chaos isn't a mistake, it's the default setting of the universe.
Precisely. If you do nothing, your house gets dirty, your car rusts, your garden gets overrun with weeds, your relationships drift apart. The massive insight here is that order requires energy. Because the natural current is dragging everything toward disorder, you have to actively burn energy just to stay in the same place.
That completely changes how I view maintenance. We think of it weekly team meetings, hitting the gym, cleaning the house as a chore, a distraction from real work. But under this model, maintenance is the price you pay to fight entropy.
It's the cost of existence. If you stop paying it, the second law takes over. The source also draws a really fascinating parallel to economics here, using the concept of temperature.
I found this analogy really helpful. In physics, temperature is just the average kinetic energy of molecules. Hot things have molecules moving fast. Cold things have molecules moving slow.
Right. So in an economy, a hot system has a lot of energy. Money is moving, transactions are happening fast, trust is high. Things get done quickly because the molecules are zipping around. In a cold economy or a low-energy corporate culture, everything is sluggish.
So if you're a leader, your job is essentially heat management. You have to inject enough energy to keep the system moving, but not so much that it overheats and blows up.
And you have to realize that if you stop injecting that energy, if you stop communicating, motivating, clarifying, the team will naturally cool down. It'll drift into disorder. That isn't a failure of the team. That is just physics.
Speaking of things cooling down and stopping, that leads us directly to our next tool, inertia.
Back to Newton we go. Newton's first law. An object at rest stays at rest, and an object in motion stays in motion, unless it's acted upon by an unbalanced force.
History credits Galileo for figuring this out with his inclined planes, but we see this every day. We just usually call it habit.
Inertia is the physics of habit. In physics, mass is a measure of inertia. The heavier the object, the harder it is to change its state. In our lives, our routines have mass. The longer you've done something, the heavier it is.
So if I've been sitting on the couch for 3 hours, I've accumulated a lot of rest inertia.
Yeah.
Getting up to go for a run isn't just a matter of willpower. I have to apply a force greater than the inertia holding me down.
Correct. And conversely, if you are doom scrolling or eating junk food, you are in motion in a specific direction. Stopping requires a massive counterforce. The status quo is so powerful because nature prefers to conserve energy. Changing your state burns fuel.
The book highlights a specific application of this that really hits home for modern workers, the restart cost of multitasking.
This is crucial. Think of your brain like a freight train. When you're deep in a project, you have momentum. You're the object in motion. If you stop to answer a Slack message or check an email, you are slamming on the brakes. You've forced the train to a halt.
And to get back to where you were, you have to overcome that static inertia all over again just to get the train moving.
You're paying an energy tax every single time you switch contexts. Research suggests it takes over 20 minutes to get back that deep focus momentum. So multitasking isn't just distracting, it is energetically expensive. You're burning limited fuel just trying to get back up to speed. It's why you can feel busy for 8 hours but get nothing done.
It explains why a day of just small tasks feels more exhausting than a day of deep focus. You're constantly fighting inertia. Now, closely related to this resistance is the concept of friction and viscosity.
These are the forces that oppose motion. Friction is the resistance between surfaces. Think of sliding a heavy box across a shag carpet versus a polished wood floor.
The carpet has high friction, it generates heat, it makes noise, and it slows you down.
And that heat and noise, that is wasted energy. In an organization, friction is bureaucracy. It's a confusing approval process. It's a website that takes 10 clicks to buy something. It drains energy that should be going toward the goal.
Then there's viscosity. I remember this from chemistry class. It's how thick a fluid is. Honey is viscous, water is not.
Right, resistance to flow. But the mental model gets really interesting when the source brings up the concept of scale. They use the comparison of the whale and the plankton.
I loved this imagery because it forces you to think about context.
So imagine a whale swimming. For a whale, water has very low viscosity. It's massive and powerful. It just glides through the ocean as if the water isn't even there. But for a microscopic plankton, the physics are totally different. At that tiny scale, water feels incredibly thick.
To a plankton, swimming through water is like a human trying to swim through molasses or tar.
Exactly. And the insight here is profound. Context dictates difficulty. The environment, the fluid you're moving through, might be low viscosity for you, but high viscosity for someone else.
That's a huge empathy check for leaders or parents. A CEO might look at a task and say, that's easy, why is the team struggling? But the CEO is the whale. They have resources, authority, experience. The junior employee is the plankton swimming through the molasses of not knowing who to ask or how the system works.
Precisely. So the question becomes, are you creating a high viscosity environment for your team? Are you making them swim through syrup? Your job is to lower the viscosity so they can flow.
Okay, so we have all these forces working against us. Inertia, friction, entropy. How do we move things that are bigger than us? We need leverage.
Ah, leverage. The ultimate force multiplier. The word itself comes from the Proto-Indo-European lek, meaning light or easy, which evolved into the Latin levere, to raise.
And we can't talk leverage without Archimedes. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it.
And I shall move the world. It's a geometric trick. Leverage lets a small force applied over a long distance move a massive weight over a short distance. We trade distance for force.
In the modern world, we don't usually use physical levers to move rocks. We use tools.
Written language is a form of leverage. One person writes a book, and that thought can reach millions of people across centuries. That's massive output for a single input. Capital is leverage. Code is leverage. You write a script once and it runs 1,000 times while you sleep.
The source uses the example of a community event. If I try to carry every table and cook every burger myself, I'm just using brute force. I'll burn out.
Right. But if you use leverage, if you get a local business to sponsor the food, recruit volunteers to move the tables, you are acting as the fulcrum. You're using the resources around you to get an outsized result.
But wait, here is where it gets really interesting. The source material throws a flag here, referencing the scholar Nassim Nicholas Taleb and his concept of anti-fragility. Leverage isn't free.
No, and this is the part people forget. Taleb argues that while leverage increases productivity, it also increases fragility. Think about the 2008 financial crisis. Banks were highly leveraged. They borrowed massive amounts of money to amplify their gains.
So when the market was going up, they made a fortune because of that leverage.
But when the market turned down just a little bit, that same leverage worked in reverse. It wiped them out. That is the danger. If you are entirely dependent on leverage on debt, on a complex technology, on one specific assistant who knows everything, you have a hidden vulnerability.
If the lever snaps, the weight crushes you.
Exactly. It can lead to systemic failure, to ruin. So the mental model is use leverage to get things done, but never become so leveraged that a small crack in the system leads to total collapse.
That is a sobering reality check. Don't over-leverage your life. Now moving on. We talked about getting started with inertia, but chemistry gives us a specific concept for the cost of starting. Activation energy.
I love this one because it explains why the world is stable. In chemistry, activation energy is the minimum energy required to break the bonds of the reactants and start a chemical reaction.
The book poses a great question here. Why doesn't the world just randomly catch fire? I mean, we are surrounded by oxygen and combustible materials like wood and paper.
It's a valid question. Combustible materials are everywhere. But they don't burn because they're chemically stable. They need a specific spike of energy, a match, a spark, lightning, to push them over the hump into a transition state. Once they cross that threshold, the reaction releases its own energy and becomes self-sustaining.
It's nature's safety lock.
And we have the same safety locks in our behavior. Think about getting out of bed on a cold morning. You are the reactant. The bed is the stable state. To change that, you need a massive spike of activation energy just to throw off the covers.
That initial push is always the hardest part. The first sentence of a difficult email. the first step of a run.
Reaction dynamics tell us that the higher the activation energy barrier, the slower the reaction will be. If a task feels impossible to start, it's because the barrier is too high. You're staring at a wall that needs too much energy to climb.
So the strategy isn't just try harder, it's lower the wall. Which brings us to our final and perhaps most powerful tool, catalysts.
A catalyst is a substance that increases the rate of a reaction without being consumed by it. It works by providing an alternative pathway with a lower activation energy.
It's like finding a tunnel through the mountain instead of having to climb over the peak.
Exactly. The classic industrial example is the catalytic converter in your car. It takes toxic fumes and turns them into safer gases. Without the catalyst, that reaction would need temperatures so high they'd melt the engine. The catalyst makes the impossible possible.
The source highlights a historical figure here that I hadn't heard of, Elizabeth Fulham.
Yes, an unsung hero of 18th century chemistry. She discovered that water was a necessary catalyst for certain reactions. She faced immense resistance because she was a woman in the 1700s publishing scientific papers. But her work laid the foundation for how we understand this today.
And we use catalysts all the time. Yeast in bread, soap in cleaning. But how does this apply to our cognitive toolkit?
A catalyst is anything that removes friction and lowers the barrier to entry. In a company, the catalyst could be a piece of software that automates a boring task. Suddenly, the reaction of finishing that report is fast and easy.
Or a person. A mentor can be a catalyst. Instead of you spending 5 years trying to figure out an industry which is a very high activation energy, a mentor introduces you to the right people. They are the tunnel.
And remember the definition. A catalyst is not consumed. A good manager is a catalyst. They speed up the team's work, they remove blockers, but they don't burn themselves out doing the work for the team. If you burn out, you aren't a catalyst. You're fuel. And fuel gets used up.
That is a vital distinction. Are you the tunnel or are you the fuel?
Exactly. You want to be the tunnel.
We have built quite a toolbox here. Let's do a quick inventory before we wrap up, because these concepts really stack on top of each other.
Sure. We started with reciprocity, Newton's third law. Relationships are action and reaction, but just be careful of power dynamics.
Then thermodynamics, specifically the second law. Disorder is the default. You have to pay the energy tax to maintain any kind of order.
Inertia habits have mass. Starting is hard, stopping is hard, and multitasking burns expensive fuel.
Friction and viscosity context is everything. Are you a whale gliding through water or a plankton stuck in syrup?
Leverage moving the world with a lever, but always remembering that leverage creates fragility and risk.
Activation energy, that initial spark you need to overcome stability and start the fire.
And finally, catalysts, the tools and the people that lower that barrier and create shortcuts for change.
It really changes the way you look at problems. Instead of calling a project stuck, you realize it just has high inertia. Instead of calling a team lazy, maybe they are in a high friction environment.
That's the power of these models. They remove the emotion and just give you the mechanics. And once you can see the mechanics, you can fix the machine.
Before we go, we always like to leave you with a provocation, something to mull over until next time.
I want to go back to that idea of the catalyst. In chemistry, a catalyst speeds up a reaction just by being there, and it comes out the other side unchanged. So my question to you is, who are the social catalysts in your life? Who's the person that, when they walk into a meeting, suddenly makes ideas flow faster and conflict just disappears?
And the flip side of that.
Right. Are you a catalyst for anyone else? When you enter a room, does the activation energy for the team go down? Or do you add friction? Are you the tunnel or are you the wall?
That is a tough question to look in the mirror and answer. Are you the catalyst or the friction? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the great mental models. Go out there, scan your world through these physics lenses and see what you discover. We'll see you next time.